Hey guys, this is the Infernoman, and we do budget, jank, fun, and Magic the Gathering Arena. Now, before we get into it, if you like the content that I put out there, I would greatly appreciate it if you hit me up with a like, or even better, subscribe to me. It really does show people that they care about what I do. If you have any questions, comments, stuff you'd like to see discussed, or if you want to talk to me directly, you can @ me on Twitter or chat directly with me, as I do stream 2 to 3 times a week on Twitch. Sometimes it's Magic, sometimes it's other games. Either way, a visual link for those are going to be up on the screen right now, and I will have direct links in the details below. Now that we have that out of the way, let's get into this deck. And today we're going to be going over Mono Black Devotion. This is going to be a slower mid-range style deck, which we're trying to utilize many of our value creatures, building up as many black mana symbols as possible to get Grey Merchant in at the end to finish off our opponent. Now, as always, we will go over first the creature package, then go over the non-creature spells, cover the mana base, and then go into the sideboard. After that, we will do a couple sparring matches with Sparky, just to show you what the deck is capable of, and then, as always, at the very end, what this deck can upgrade into. Our creature package is going to be 24 creatures in the main deck. We have a lot of creatures that do provide black mana symbols and provide a lot of value when they come into the battlefield. Beginning with Cauldron Familiar. Cauldron Familiar, 1/1 cat. When the familiar enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. Sack of food, bring the Cauldron Familiar back from the graveyard to the battlefield. Cat needs no introduction. I'm sure many of you have seen what this cat is capable of doing. It's in the deck, it's solid. We have it just because it's our only 1-drop and we need something to provide us time while we build up the rest of our board. Gifted Aetherborn. 2 mana for a 2/3 Aetherborn Vampire with Death Touch and Lifelink. Simple, great blocker. It prevents our opponent from trying to swing in with some of their bigger creatures, and sometimes we can trade up with it. Tyramat, Chosen from Death. 2 black mana symbols for a 2 and asterisk, which is its toughness depending on how much devotion we have to black. For 2 mana, we exile up to 2 target cards from the graveyard. You gain 1 life for each creature exiled this way. This is going to be one of our creatures that helps us with graveyard hate, and it eats up the graveyard. Very sweet to have, and as we keep getting more black mana symbols from our creatures, it starts making itself much more harder to get rid of. Yarok's Fenlurker. A horror 1/1, 2 black mana symbols. When the Fenlurker enters the battlefield, each opponent exiles a card from their hand. For 3 mana, the Fenlurker gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Another creature we can use to sink some of our mana into while we're building up our board. Slowly helps us with the plan, which is get rid of cards out of the game. Liliana's Devotee. For 2 mana, 2/3, Human Warlock, zombies you control get +1/+0. At the beginning of your end step, if a creature died this turn, you may pay 2 mana. If you do, you create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. I only have 1 in the deck, but it actually can be surprisingly helpful and effective depending on your matchups. With cards such as our Cauldron Familiar that sack themselves with the Witch's Oven, the Devotee actually then triggers off of that if we do it during our main step. Anytime a creature is gone, we can just start building up at least 1 zombie each turn. This may not seem like a big deal, but this can help us slowly grind out some value, and again, it's another good mana sink while we're building up the board. Even though it's a 2/2 zombie, remember that zombies you control get +1/+0, so technically the zombie does come in as a 3/2. The only downside of the card is, again, it's kind of narrow because we're not really focusing on trying to make zombies. We only have 1 other zombie, which is going to be the Grey Merchant, and that's not really something we want to use as aggro. We're using it as a finisher. Still, 1 copy is pretty good, so just consider that. Bloodthirsty Aerialist. For 3 mana, a 2/3 Vampire Rogue with Flying. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on the Aerialist. This goes to synergize with our Tyramat, Chosen from Death, synergizes with the Gifted Aetherborn, synergizes with the Cauldron Familiar, so it will get back pretty quick if our opponent doesn't deal with it. Helps us get in early damage, and also it can be a pseudo secondary finisher in case that we can't get the Grey Merchant down, because this is much more faster to get down and can get really big really quickly. Ravenous Chupacabra. 4 mana, Beast Horror, 2/2. When the Chupacabra enters the battlefield, destroy target creature an opponent controls. It's our creature removal. Not much else to it. 3 copies is all we need, just helping us keep control of the board, and it helps us get rid of some of our big creatures that may have an easier time pushing through damage, such as maybe a Questing Beast. Keep in mind, a lot of our creatures are only 2 power. Actually, all of our creatures are 2 power. Yikes. So things like that can be taken care of with the Chupacabra. Grey Merchant of the Fossil. When the Grey Merchant enters the battlefield, each opponent loses X life, where X is your devotion to black. You gain life equal to the life lost this way. This is, of course, the main event for the deck, the whole purpose of why we're playing Devotion in the first place. So keep your creatures alive as best you can, get the Grey Merchant down to try to close out the game with your opponent, and the life gain also does trigger with the Bloodthirsty Aerialist, so it's also a sweet option there. And that is basically it for the creatures. Let's go ahead and also look at the spells that help support the game plan. As far as the non-creature spell package is concerned, we mostly have some removal and some ways of punishing our opponent for trying to get rid of our creatures. So here we go. Bloodchief's Thirst. For 1 mana, destroy target creature with a planeswalker with converted mana cost 2 or less. If the spell was kicked for 3 mana, instead destroy target creature or planeswalker. General removal, we only need 2 copies in the deck. We're trying to build value with our creatures, so we don't want to focus too much on removing certain things, unless if they're really going to be a trouble for the deck. With that, that also goes with Fatal Push. 2 copies of this as well. Destroy target creature if it has a converted mana cost of 2 or less. Destroy that creature if it has a converted mana cost of 4 or less, instead, if a permanent you control left the battlefield this turn. Synergizes with the Cat Oven strategy, helps us get rid of some of the bigger creatures out there, and this is why we only have 2 copies versus the Bloodchief's Thirst. This just gives us a little bit more flexibility in terms of creature removal and otherwise planeswalker removal. Malakar Rebirth. Choose target creature. You lose 2 life until the end of turn. That creature gets, when this creature dies, return it to the battlefield tapped under its opponent's control. And also you can put it into as a land tapped. Mostly, the only reason why we have 2 of these in the deck and why we're using them in the first place is it is nice to have a extra land. But the real reason why you want to have this is in case of something does go down, like somehow you lose your Fenlurker, somehow you lose maybe a Grey Merchant, and you're really close to finishing the game. Being able to put this onto one of your creatures to bring it back generates more value. You can get another card exiled from your opponent's hand. You can then bring in a Grey Merchant again to double trigger off on its ability. So really helpful. Not too often you're going to need it, but it works. And the reason why we're using it again is it can be a land or it can be a spell. Really nice in the flex spot. Witch's Oven. 1 mana, artifact. Sacrifice a creature, create a food token. If the sacrificed creature's toughness was 4 or greater, create 2 food tokens instead. For 2 mana and tap, the food token has sacrificed the artifact, you gain 3 life. Only reason you're really using this is for the Cat Oven strategy. Sometimes you might need to sack something else. Not too often that happens. In some weird instances, some of the adventure spells where, say, like maybe a Bone Crusher Giant is trying to stomp on something, and it might be more valuable to sacrifice the creature, which then makes our opponent lose the Bone Crusher and throws it into the graveyard. They basically now lose 2 for the price of 1. There's situations that happen like that. It's rare, but just keep that in mind. Bastion of Remembrance. When Bastion of Remembrance enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. Whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life. It goes very well with our Flying Vampire. This helps out grind out more value with the Cat Oven strategy, as now this means you can technically get 2 pings off an opponent, but we only need 2 in the deck. This only gives us 1 black mana symbol, now that I mentioned that, but being able to have a little bit more of a leeway in terms of draining and gaining helps us stay in the game a little bit longer. Tendrils of Corruption, 4 mana, instant speed. Tendrils of Corruption deals X damage to target creature, and you gain X life, where X is the number of swamps you control. We're mostly focused on trying to generate value with the creatures, but this is just a slightly more expensive removal spell. But the main reason why I wanted to use it was, since we're mono black, it is much easier to utilize. Not to mention that life gain can be really helpful in a pinch, and it does scale up as the game goes longer. So some of our bigger creatures that we have to deal with are more likely to be handled when, say, maybe your Fatal Push doesn't quite reach them, or if the Bloodchief's Thirst is not fast enough to deal with them. And that is going to be the non-creature spell package. Let's talk about the land base real quick. As far as the mana base is concerned, you're running 22 lands in total. Malakar Rebirth does technically push it to 24 lands, but that's neither here or there. We kind of discussed that card already. 20 swamps, pretty simple, pretty cut and dry. Bojuka Bog, 2 of those, they enter the battlefield tapped. However, when they enter the battlefield, you exile all cards from target player's graveyard. This is going to be helpful and a really easy way to just get rid of an opponent's graveyard that is running around with Uros, Croaxes, all the graveyard shenanigans out there. There you go. Really easy for the land base. Nothing else to say. Let's go over the sideboard. One of the good things about our mono black devotion plan is it's great at removing creatures. The only downside of the deck is the base package has a hard time dealing with control decks. So that's what most of our sideboard is focused on. As always, the obligatory adjust your sideboard depending on what the meta is, blah, blah, blah. You guys get already. Bloodchief's Thirst, an extra copy of it. We're going to be utilizing 4 Duress to discard cards from our opponent's hand. 2 Agonizing Remorse that also stacks with Duress, a little slower. It does make us lose 1 life, but being able to exile a card is a big deal. 3 Cry of the Carnarium if we have to deal with go wide strategies and tokens, and adding to that would be also the Virulent Plague. 2 copies of Underworld Dreams. This enchantment helps us deal damage to our opponent whenever they draw cards, so those control decks that are very card draw happy get punished for that, and also the 3 black mana symbols goes well with the Black Devotion plan. And finally, Thought Distortion. A very expensive 6-mana spell at sorcery, but the key is it can't be countered. When our opponent reveals their hand, you exile all non-creature, non-land cards from that player's hand and graveyard. So this can completely change the game versus some mono black decks. I think I have a couple of screenshots I can show you guys where I actually managed to beat, with just this deck, a blue-white control deck that was pretty top tier. But that's neither here nor there. Well, I don't want to show off. Anyways, that's basically the whole deck. Let's go over it now with Sparky as our sparring partner and show you more or less what this deck is trying to do. And here we go. We are playing Mono Black Devotion against Sparky to help us spar and show you what this deck is capable of. Okay, so we have a Gray Merchant, so this is again what we want to get to. Bloodthirsty Aerialist is here as well. One removal spell and a Witch's Oven. Let's keep this and see where it goes. Okay. So we're dealing with blue. A Bojuka Bog is normally nice if you are going to have to deal with Graveyard Hate. Unfortunately, I don't think Sparky's really going to do any of that stuff. Let's put down the Witch's Oven. If you have to choose for your first turn option, whether it's a creature or it's the Witch's Oven, it all just comes down to what you may have to guess your opponent is playing. If they're playing counter spells, you're probably going to want to put down the Witch's Oven first before you put down the creature, as they are less likely to have a counter spell for the creature. All right, Fendlurker's okay. So let's see. Let's go ahead. Let's put down the Fendlurker. That gets rid of a card. So our option and plan right now looks like we're going to try to get down our flyer here. If we can find a way to gain some life, this will actually be really big and powerful. But the Gray Merchant also triggers it off as well. All right, our turn again. Okay, 2 Gray Merchants. Okay, so we're going to try to, let's see, how do we do this? Let's put down the Swamp. And let's Bloodchief's Thirst the Gull. That's out of the way. Nothing else we can do for the time being, which is okay. We're going to put down that Bloodthirsty Aerialist next turn. Start building up our Devotion plan. And Sparky's getting really cheeky with a creature that does nothing. So, okay. I don't know. I still think they need to program this a little better, but okay. Go with that. Okay, sweet. We do have our cat. So, Bojuka Bog. Let's put down the Bloodthirsty Aerialist. And then next turn, we can put down the cat. We can start growing the Aerialist. Okay. Looks like Sparky is going to try to slow down the plan, which is fine. Keep in mind that Mono Black Devotion is more likely to be a bit of a slower, grindier deck. And it's probably one of our slowest decks we've played in terms of the budget decks so far. And Sparky just wants to keep attacking here. I don't know why, but it's okay. All right, let's try this again. Bloodthirsty Aerialist. Cauldron Familiar. Triggers off. Now we have a stronger attacker, which is going to be great. And now we can start doing our loop with the Witch's Oven, which will pump up the Bloodthirsty Aerialist and make it a bigger threat. I'm going to sack it now. Normally you want to do your sacks at the end of your opponent's turn, just to minimize the possibility that they could try to remove it. But in this instance, we'll just pump it. And let's go do a double block. Rarely you're ever going to have to do this. But I just want to get rid of the creature just to show you what we can do here. Okay, so we're 1 mana away from showing the Gray Merchant kill here. But that's okay. You also can use your mana to pump up the Yarok's Fendlurker. So we're going to do that now. It just helps us close out the game a little bit faster. If we can get to 1 more mana, then we can show you again how you want to finish this match off. Witch's Oven at the end of the turn. Sacrifice the Cauldron Familiar. Bring it back. Keep in mind also, when you're also doing your sacks with this, this also will trigger off Fatal Push's Revolt ability. So keep that in mind, that you might want to time it differently depending on what kind of deck your opponent is playing. We're not going to attack. I just want to show you guys what Gray Merchant is going to do. So let's see if we can actually get to 1 more land. At least with this right now, we actually have an example of what we can do with the Cauldron Familiar. Okay, that's fine. That I'm not obviously worried about. For demonstration purposes, this is what I'm going to try to do. So we sack the cat. So that pumps up Fatal Push. So now we can get rid of the Cloudkin Seer. Sorry, Sparky. Sparky's doing a great job of showing us an example of how this deck works. It still triggers here. Pass, come on. Give me a land. We got all the Witch's Ovens, which is okay, I guess. it doesn't do much. Because even though Sparky has tried to lock up our bloodthirsty aerialist, it's still pumping itself up. Not that we really care about that at this point, because we're so close to winning. Let's go ahead and do our sacks one more time. Getting closer to victory here. Pumping up the bloodthirsty aerialist we can't really use. There's our swamp. Okay, so with this point, all of our swamps down. Now we can put down a Gray Merchant. It has +5 on there, but it also counts its 2, so that's actually 7 from all of that. And there you go. That's basically how you finish it off. Mono black budget devotion. If you're looking to upgrade your mono black devotion deck, there's 2 routes you could go primarily. You can either go more of a control route or more of an aggro route. Let's go over the aggro package first. So these are the cards I want to mention specifically: Dread Wanderer, Gutter Bones, and Knight of the Eben Legion. Our 2 zombie and skeleton creatures in the 1-drop slot can help us replace the Cat Oven strategy completely. They smash face. They only do 2/1, but their ability helps them bring them back over and over again. So no matter how many times your opponent tries to blow them up, they'll just keep coming back. And I seriously doubt for 1-drops your opponent's going to want to waste an exile spell on them. So these are really, really solid. Knight of the Eben Legion cannot bring itself back, but it can pump itself up. So it becomes a very early dangerous threat if it is not kept in check. Consider using this also if you cannot get either of the other 2 cards, but all 3 of them together are also pretty sweet to have. Now we jump right to the 4-drop slot with Phyrexian Obliterator, Spawn of Mayhem, and Rankle. Let's actually go over Spawn of Mayhem first. It's a flying trample demon, which at the beginning of your upkeep, Spawn of Mayhem deals 1 damage to each player. Then, if you have 10 or less life, put a +1/+1 counter on Spawn of Mayhem. You can pay 3 mana instead for spectacle cost, which means if an opponent lost life this turn, you can only pay 3 mana to bring it in instead of 4. Really dangerous threat if your opponent does not deal with it quickly. Yes, it does also hurt you, but again, if you're going to put this into an aggro deck, this is fantastic for your mono black devotion. Rankle, Master of Pranks. Legendary creature, Fairy Rogue, 3/3, flying and haste. When Rankle deals combat damage to a player, choose any number. You can either have them, each player discard a card, each player loses 1 life, draw a card, each player sacrifices a creature. Depending on what your board state is, this thing is going to be really awesome in terms of trying to mess with your opponent's game plan, whether it's to get rid of a creature, sacrifice maybe one of your Gutter Bones, and then being able to possibly draw a card, ping them, maybe lose life, whatever you needed to do, it does great. Phyrexian Obliterator. 4 black mana for a horror 5/5 with trample. Whenever a source deals damage to Phyrexian Obliterator, that source's controller sacrifices that many permanents. This is basically what you really want for the mono black devotion. Does great damage. If your opponent has to block it, then they're going to lose permanents really quickly. This is the top end of what you want to get. If you're going the aggro route, definitely pick this card up as soon as possible. Now going over the control side of mono black devotion. So cards that you want to consider. Add in Castle Lochwain. At least 1 copy helps you can draw cards if you are starting to flood out. Thoughtseize, upgrade your Duresses with these real quick as soon as possible. Really helps out. You do lose 2 life when you do use this card, but you are gaining a lot of life in this deck, so that's kind of negligible for us. Murderous Rider, Zombie Knight, 2/3, lifelink. When Murderous Rider dies, you put it at the bottom of its owner's library, but you're really utilizing this for its ability, which is Swift End. Its adventure allows you to destroy target creature or planeswalker. Same thing, you do lose life, but you're gaining so much life in this deck as is, it's not a big deal. 2 mana symbols also helps out with the devotion plan. Witch's Vengeance. Creatures of the creature type of your choice get -3/-3 until end of turn. You're using this against mostly the Goblins deck right now, or any other tribal deck out there, so consider that. Ayara, First of Lochwain. 3 black mana symbols for a legendary elf noble creature, 2/3. When Ayara or another black creature enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. You can also tap it to sacrifice another black creature and draw a card. I honestly put this more in the control side because with strategies such as the Cat Oven, this helps us ping our opponent very slowly and helps us grind out value out of our other black creatures that do their job, and we're just trying to help build up more value towards our end goal. So this is mostly why I put this here in the control side versus the aggro side. Extinction Event. Choose odd or even. Exile each creature with the converted mana cost of the chosen value. And FYI, 0 is even. Great removal. Most of black has a lot of removal, but this is the 1 black card I would say for the deck that you want to consider specifically. Liliana, Waker of the Dead. For 4 mana, Planeswalker. +1, being able to discard a card. Each opponent who can't loses 3 life. It's -3 as target creature gets -X until end of turn, where X is the number of cards in your graveyard. It's -7 ability. You get an emblem with, at the beginning of combat on your turn, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and it gains haste. So this is mostly going to be in the control side for a couple reasons. This helps us discard opponents' cards and helps start draining them out. It can also keep the board under control with being able to sometimes minus something depending on how many cards are in the graveyard. And of course, that final emblem, if you can get it off, can be really sweet to throw our opponent's creatures against them. Liliana Dreadhorde General, 6 mana. Whenever a creature you control dies, draw a card. It's +1. Create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. It's -4. Each player sacrifices 2 creatures. It's -9. Each opponent chooses a permanent they control of each permanent type and sacrifices the rest. If you're going to go full on control with this deck, you might want to consider this, and this actually might even replace the Grey Merchant, but to do that means you're going to be changing the deck completely. Still, if you're going to go mono black control more towards that instead of devotion, this is also a pretty sweet card to get if you can get it out there. It generates its own value on its own, and it's its own standalone threat. Bolas' Citadel. For 6 mana, legendary artifact. You may look at the top card of your library anytime. You may play lands and cast spells from the top of your library. If you cast a spell this way, pay life equal to its converted mana cost rather than pay its mana cost. Its tap ability, sacrifice 10 non-land permanents. Each opponent loses 10 life. This is going to be mostly if you're going to focus on a combo with your devotion. It provides 3 black mana symbols, which is really sweet with the Grey Merchant. And if you can combo off by putting a Grey Merchant, by paying its 5 mana, you get that mana back the instant it comes out, because the black mana symbols that are on the Grey Merchant plus the Bolas Citadel would mean it would be coming out for free. So just consider that as well. If you can get to the sacrifice 10 non-land permanents, then it usually is a game-ending victory. Massacre Worm, 6 mana. 6/5 Worm. When Massacre Worm enters the battlefield, creatures your opponent controls gets -2/-2 until end of turn. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, that player loses 2 life. Same thing with what I mentioned with the Ayara. Massacre Worm is mostly here on the control side because you're looking at this more as an actual wrath versus it being an actual creature. Not to say it's not a creature, it is a really sweet creature, but being able to not only destroy your opponent's board, but being able to drain them out quickly swings the game back in your favor. And that is basically the whole package with both sides. Depending on where you go with the deck, you have tons of options in mono black. And that is mono black devotion for you. So tell me what you think. Do you like this style of deck where you have a lot of mid-range value that you're trying to generate? Do you prefer slower, grindier decks? If that's the kind of style you like, consider this deck as a base before you want to build more towards other black cards. The black cards that I mentioned from both sides, whether you pick the aggro or the control side, are all solid. But if you want my personal opinion, I would say maybe you might want to steer more towards the control side for a couple reasons. The control cards that I showed off are going to be cards that are utilized in other decks, so just take that into consideration. But if you are more of an aggro player and you like black, there's nothing wrong with going the other way either. Either way, you tell me what you prefer in the comments below. Okay, time for a quick cringe story from you guys from my past. Way back in the day, I actually had a friend that had tried to hit up a girl at a Magic event, asking her if she was interested in having some mono black devotion fun. I don't think he was talking about the deck, though. So thanks again for watching, guys. Be sure to like and subscribe if I helped you out or at least entertained you. And until next time, when in doubt, jank 'em out. Later.